Chapter 21. All the Powers of Hell. "Help!" Dawn yelled. "Mr. Crowley, please wake up!" But the shopkeeper didn't. His aim was dead on. She dodged out of the way just in time. His arms whiffed it thin air as Dawn remained barely out of reach. Dawn leapt to her feet and ran for her bike, while Samson barked wildly. The shopkeeper still staggered toward her, undeterred by Samson's growls and teeth. "Don't hurt him, boy," Dawn called to Samson. "He doesn't know what he's doing." Lightning stirred overhead, then flashed over the center of town. Loud thunder exploded. All of a sudden, as if woken by lightning, everyone in town came to life. They started lurching toward Dawn. She mounted her bike. She rode as fast as she could, picking up speed, but as she passed the station wagon, still idling at the stop sign, Fred leapt out of the passenger seat. She stared at her classmate in horror. He jumped at her, trying to tackle her off her bike, even as she was racing by. "No, get off me!" Dawn yelled, kicking at him. Fred absorbed the blows like they were nothing, and he wouldn't give up. He jerked his head toward the spinning wheel and grabbed for it. But then he howled in agony as green fire erupted from it and singed his hand. Fred fell down, writhing in pain and clutching his hand. "Sorry, Fred," Dawn said. "You'll feel better tomorrow, I hope." But Dawn had an idea now. She could use the wheel to keep the other entranced townspeople away from her. Their feet dragged on the pavement, but they continued relentlessly. Dawn grabbed the spinning wheel and held it up. "Don't come any closer," she yelled, "or it'll zap you." Hands reached for the wheel, activating the protection spells. A ring of green flames exploded out of the wheel, encircling Dawn and Samson. "That's right," Dawn yelled, grabbing her bike. "Stay back!" This time, she strapped the wheel to the front of her bike, where it could protect her. Then she got on. She sailed out of the town center, cutting a path through the mob of townspeople, using the wheel's powers to keep them away. She glanced back. The possessed mob of townspeople had stopped their sleepwalking and now simply stood asleep in the middle of town. "I have to fix this," she thought, as she pedaled as hard as she could, for all of them. Despite her heart still pounding and her increasing adrenaline, Dawn had come up with a plan. The spinning wheel the dark fairy coveted could be used to protect them from her. Dawn also had the sword that looked like the one the prince in the tapestries had used. These were now Dawn's weapons. Maybe the wheel could be used for other things too. Could it stop the curse? And even defeat the dark fairy? Hope blossomed in her heart for the first time in a long while. "I'm going to save my friend," she thought, "even if it's the last thing I do." "Which way, boy?" Dawn called to Samson. He barked, then led her down a familiar road. Dawn pedaled after him, recognizing the Terran. They were heading for Philippa's house. "Is that where the fairy took her?" Dawn asked. Samson barked, as if to say yes. The closer they got to the castle-like home, the more the storm overhead intensified. Wind whipped at her, trying to tear her from her seat. But Dawn gritted her teeth, ducked her head down, and pedaled harder, riding through the wrought iron gate, then screeched to a halt in front of the castle. Rose hedges surrounded the perimeter, and vines snaked up the walls, covering the entire exterior in rose blossoms. Dawn scanned the house, looking for any sign of life. One light was on in the highest tower, Philippa's bedroom. Samson followed her gaze and barked wildly. "What is it, boy?" Dawn asked, looking around warily. "Is that where she is?" Samson barked again. Yes, yes. They had started toward the castle when suddenly cackling laughter bellowed out from the sky, as if coming from the storm clouds overhead. Dawn froze. Samson barked ferociously, and then, in a great puff of emerald smoke, A black shadow materialized in front of the castle's entrance. Its eyes glowed with bright yellow light. Its staff shimmered with a crystal orb. 2 horns arched from its head. It raised its arms, its robes resembling wings. It was Maleficent in all her dark glory. "Stay back and let us pass," Dawn said, pushing forward her bike with the spinning wheel strapped to it. We just want to find my friend. This has protection spells. They'll fight you off." The dark fairy's voice rang out. "Poor simple fool. That may have worked on the rabble and the townsfolk, but it won't work on me. It does contain power, but I have power too. Your friend is imprisoned in her bedroom, cursed by my sleeping spell. You can't save her. It's too late." "Liar," Dawn said. "I don't believe you. You tricked me once." But now she knew for sure. Philippa was locked in her bedroom. Dawn continued forward. Maleficent cackled, but then the spinning wheel responded too. Emerald fire simmered, igniting the antique wood. The unnatural flames formed a ring of protection around Dawn and Samson. Dawn felt emboldened as they reached the middle of the stone bridge fronting the home. The flames had almost reached the dark fairy. What are you doing?" the fairy gasped and flinched back. But then anger crested her face. "I'll teach you," she bellowed. "Think you could defeat me, the mistress of all evil?" With that, she started running her long fingers over the orb on her staff, summoning her magic. It glowed brighter, igniting with simmering green fire. "A forest of thorns shall be your tomb," the dark fairy chanted in a hypnotic voice. Lightning flashed. "Born through the skies in a pit of doom. Now go with the curse and serve me well." In a puff of smoke, Maleficent vanished. But then, the storm clouds overhead swirled, growing thicker and darker. Thunder rumbled ominously, then cracked dangerously. The wind picked up into gale-force speeds. A bolt of green lightning struck down, hitting the spire that housed Philippa's room. It struck again and again, hitting different spots of the castle. Everywhere the bolts hit, rose vines with razor-sharp thorns sprung up and grew unnaturally fast, surrounding the castle's entrance and keeping Dawn and Samson from reaching it. Delicate rose blossoms sprouted from them, displaying their beauty, but it was a trap. Underneath those delicate soft petals lay sharp thorns waiting to snag and slice them. Samson barked fiercely at the vines. He whined and looked up at the spire, which seemed impossible to reach now. "Can you find the way through?" Dawn asked him. He barked and stuck his nose to the ground. Then Samson looked back. "Bark, bark!" Dawn abandoned her bike. She took the bungee cords and strapped the spinning wheel and sword to her back. They were heavy, but protected her. Samson somehow led her through thickening vines with razor-sharp thorns. One sliced her sleeve, cutting it open and drawing blood from her arm. They reached an extremely dense area of vines. Samson wriggled under it. He looked back, urging Dawn to follow him, but Dawn was stuck. She couldn't fight through the vines, especially with the spinning wheel on her back. It protected them, but she couldn't get through with it constantly getting entangled. Dawn felt hopeless. Rain started pelting down, soaking her, while the storm rumbled and intensified. It was then she hit upon an idea. "That's it! The sword!" she gasped. She seized the bejeweled hilt, unsheathed it, shing, and held it up. Lightning struck the castle again, reflecting off the steely double-edged blade. As she clutched the hilt tighter, Dawn felt strength travel up the sword and into her arms like magic. She felt invincible. She raised the weapon and chopped through the rose vines. They fell away like nothing at the mere touch of the sharp blade. Dawn stared at the sword in awe. It's a magic sword? She remembered the illustrations in the old book they found in the shed of the prince wielding the sword of truth. Was this the same sword? Hardened by that thought, Dawn sliced her way toward the castle's entrance. A few minutes later, Dawn and Samson had made it through the vines. The arched stone entrance stood before them, ready to grant access to the castle-like house. Now all Dawn had to do was get to the top of the tower to rescue her friend. Using the wheel would help Dawn find a way to break the sleeping curse. Suddenly, a voice roared from the sky. "No, it cannot be!" Maleficent screamed. Her cries cut through the wind. "Stay away!" Dawn yelled, brandishing the sword of truth. She held it up to the sky. Lightning struck in front of Dawn, releasing green smoke. Dawn and Samson both leapt back in fear as loud thunder exploded and rattled the bridge before the home's entrance. When she peeled her eyes open, Dawn gasped at what she saw. A dark shadow rose between Dawn and Samson right by the castle's entrance. Lightning struck again, illuminating its horned head. The shadow stared at Dawn with fury. "Now you shall deal with me," Maleficent proclaimed, "and all the powers of hell!" She raised her staff, then she brought it down. Crack! Green fire exploded from it, while black smoke billowed out, shrouding her dark shadow. Dawn ducked back, shielding her eyes from the blazing hot inferno. The shadow grew taller and taller before turning into a horrifying black dragon. The creature cracked open its jaws and shot out green flames right at Dawn. Dawn jumped back behind the thick vines she had battled through, barely escaping. A wave of heat still struck her. Terror rushed through Dawn. She remembered the cover of Philippa's fantasy book. This only happened in fairy tales. The dragon roared so loudly that it shook the ground under Dawn's feet. It was as tall as the castle, maybe even a little taller. It took 2 steps toward her. Boom, boom, then reared its head back and shrieked, displaying fearsome teeth. Even Samson whined and shook terribly. The hellish beast raised its horned head, preparing to attack again. Dawn tried to hide, ducking into the vines and crawling through the brambles, feeding them tear at her skin. She still clutched the sword, but it felt like a feeble defense against this humongous, deadly creature. The black dragon let out another blast of fire. It hit the vines, singeing them away and exposing her. Dawn looked up in horror. The beast was staring down at her with glowing yellow eyes. Dawn still had the sword, but she was trapped. The dragon let out a terrible cackle. A familiar voice emerged. "Not so fast. Think you can escape the mistress of all evil?" Then it unleashed a torrent of emerald fire.